Welcome back, it's John with Focus Camera, here with Tom Cubby. I would love to say what his title is, but I will mess it up every time.
It's a senior sales support engineer. Simple.
Simple. Just add Sony to the front of it, it's a tongue twister. And this time we're talking more about the cinema lineup from Sony, the FX6. If you're coming from an FX3 or an FX30, then I know that the menu operations are different on something like an FX6. Can you kind of go into a bit more of what to expect when you make that big jump?
What I love about the menu in the FX6 is it's two parts. You have the full menu, which allows you to get to every single setting, which can be a little intimidating for some folks. Although there is a user menu, we can run through that, make things set up nice and easy for you. And there's also the quick menu / status menu. What is that? Well, if I just press the menu button once, I get status pages, 1 through 10, and I can scroll through those with the jog dial, with the joystick, or even by taking my finger and swiping up and down. We all know how to swipe, right? Cell phones and whatnot. And then with certain items within the menu, you'll see a dual outline, and I can simply select those. So let's select one here. I want to change from full frame to Super 35. I'm just literally touching the screen. I selected the Super 35. I click OK, and I made the change that quick, as opposed to going into all these deeper menus in the full menu to do that. Not something you want to do when you're out in the field and time is precious. So we developed that system to make things easier for the end user. The full menu, I push and hold, and now I have access to every single category, the user menu, shooting, projects, paint, etc. Let's jump into the user menu because that can simplify even using the full menu. I can go into the user menu, I can scroll down, go to edit user menu, and now from here I can add, subtract, and move items in the list. So for instance, let's say I'm not using any slow-mo, so I'm going to select S and Q, and then I just choose delete, and that item gets deleted from the list. Now don't worry, if you did that by accident, they call that accidentally on purpose. If you did it by accident, you can always go back down to the bottom menu and reset the customization, or you could just actually add it from the list. So I'm going to go down to the bottom, and I do add item. I click, and then I sort through the list. Let's add LUTs on and off. It gives you submenu items to add as well. I click OK. We've selected LUT on off, but this is an item that I might want to use often, so I can move that near the top. So I select it, I hit select move from the list, and then I'm just going to move my cursor to wherever I want. In this case, I'm going to move it to the top of the list. I press in my jog wheel, my multi-dial, what's actually called, and now I've moved the LUT on off to the top of the list. What's awesome is if I exit the menu, and then again, long press back into the menu, it stays where you last left it. So for items, it's not quite making an assignable button, but you can add an item in there that you like to access quickly, something like maybe formatting media, and you can quickly access it just by exiting the menu. You hop right back in. As long as you were right there when you left it, you're right back there again.
So just like the FX3 and the FX30, I can save this menu setup into like an SD card, right?
Absolutely. It's different than the FX3 or 30, but let's take a look. So we're exiting both the edit user menu and we're exiting the user menu. And we're going to go down to project. Go to project menu and scroll all the way down to user file. Select user file. You'll see load and save options. We're going to select save to media. We have to select a slot, so we select no file. And then we execute. So we saved our file. At a later time, maybe you borrowed my camera or I have a second camera that I want to set up, I simply now go to load, just like all of our cameras that save and load. Select that file and execute. The camera is going to reboot, by the way. In addition to the user file, we also have the all file. That is more than just setting up some helpful items. This is the entire menu structure of the camera. All the settings are there. So again, you could do the same thing, select all file. You save your media first, and then you load. You're going to use the same process, select a slot that says no file, add it, and then you load it when you need it. This is useful, again, if you ever had to reset the camera. Maybe you were renting a camera and it came back and you wanted to get it back to settings that are helpful for your next customer. You can load that file back in, and now you're back to the settings that you set the camera up for. I should note that in both the user file and the all file, you need to have the card in slot B.
So like the FX30 and the FX3, you can save all of your data straight to the card and then just reload it whenever you need to, or just your user presets and reload those as you need to. So it's pretty nice if you're in a multi-team environment. But what else can this thing do?
My favorite feature on this camera, and it's been a feature in Sony cameras for quite some time, it's the electronic variable ND. And I know there's a lot of stuff out there about it, but I'm just going to take a quick run through. So the electronic variable ND drops an LCD panel in front of the image sensor. We're able to change the density of the LCD panel either in presets or using a dial in a variable fashion where we can change the ND in 1/3 stop increments. So essentially, it's as smooth as an aperture. Let me show you what I mean. So I select ND by hitting the plus button here. It's going to engage the ND filter. And now each time I hit the plus button, I get a different ND value. Now what are those values? Well, I can decide that in the menu. I push and hold the menu. I go down to shooting. I go to ND filter. And I have preset 1, preset 2, and preset 3. I simply select from the list, 1/4, 1/8, 16, 32, 64, 128. That's 2 to 7 stops. But what makes it really powerful is the variable. So with variable, I simply push the switch over on the camera to the right. Now I'm using the dial, and I can dial in the exact amount of ND that I need. So this is the workflow. You set your aperture to get your depth of field. Then I turn my ND filter on, and I turn the dial until I have the exact exposure I need. Now, in some cases, you may be dealing with environments that are very challenging, like clouds rolling in and out of a sunny day, and now you're chasing exposure. So simply put the ND filter to auto, right? We push and hold the auto button, it lights up. We know we're in auto now. We have exposure control settings that can override that, so I can go plus or minus 3 stops, and I can change the speed to how the auto function reacts. Now as the clouds roll in and out, I have proper exposure, and I never had to change my aperture and affect my depth of field. It's also a valuable tool for doing walk and talks, where I'm walking into a building or out of a building, into the shade from the sun, vice versa. Very, very powerful tool. My favorite use, and it's one that most people never heard about, it's called a depth of field pull. Simply putting the electronic variable ND into auto, setting your focus point on the subject, and then as they're talking on camera, they might be talking about their childhood home, which we could see in the background. We had the depth of field set up for it being pretty deep. I start moving my iris to open it up further and further, reducing the depth of field, and shallowing out the depth of field so we no longer see the house in the background. Everything is focused on the subject who's now getting emotional about the story he's telling. Essentially, you're directing the viewer to where you want, just like when you're doing regular depth of field changes. In this case, you're doing a depth of field pull where everything is in focus to one thing in focus just by having that auto variable ND.
So this isn't just a electronic thing as in software. This is an actual filter that's physically going down, but letting you have the variable aspects.
Correct. And the beauty is you have full control. You can, in a quick pinch, you could just have a preset so you know if it's at noon, high noon, and it's really sunny out and that you always use 7 stops, you can use a preset and just punch in 7 stops. Or if you want to be more creative, pop it over to auto and let it work.
So what are some of the autofocus features of this that can help with people working on those big projects?
The FX6 does a really nice job of autofocus. It does use our fast hybrid autofocus system, similar to the FX3 and FX30. It's a combination of technologies, both contrast-based focus, but primarily the phase detection. So it's got phase detection autofocus points all over the sensor, covers about 94, 96% of the imager with these sensors that essentially does object recognition, knows the distance, so it locks in on you at a certain distance. It knows you're 5 feet 3 inches away. We tweak it with the contrast, and then we have this really good autofocus system. But autofocus is only good, anything is only good for as much control as you have over it. In our camera, under shooting, we go to focus, and there's a menu system that allows you to set some of the things like transition speed. That's going to be equivalent to how fast am I turning the focus ring, to subject shift sensitivity, which is when do I want to shift from one subject to another. So for instance, I could have a subject walking towards the camera. Depth of field is getting deeper, or more shallow, I should say, where the background's falling further and further out of focus. They walk past the camera. Do I want to switch and focus to the background right away? Or do I want to have a delay and use that out of focus background as a transition? So it allows you to be really creative using an autofocus function. All these tools for autofocus are really powerful, but what really makes the autofocus system powerful is its ability to detect the face or the eye. So I mentioned phase detection before. This is face detection. So I'm going to spell it out. PHASE versus FACE. So we got face and eye auto detection. So you have a box that can detect a person's face or their eye. It'll actually default to the eye first. If it has trouble seeing the eye, it'll move out to the face. You've got control over that. You can literally move the box to another person with a joystick, push that joystick in, and now lock the focus onto that face. And simply go back and forth in that same process. So again, if you have autofocus without control, what good is it? This is amazing control with an amazing autofocus system. In addition to the face and eye detection, there's also what's called touch focus. So with touch focus, you simply touch on the screen. I mentioned before the status menu of the camera, you can scroll the pages with your finger. That's because it's a touch screen. So without the menu in place, I can touch anywhere on the screen. So if there's not a subject with a face or an eye, maybe it's somebody on a bicycle or a car, I can simply touch on that subject and that focus box will track the subject across the frame.
So I've seen clear image zoom before and a bunch of different Sony products. So what is that clear image zoom? What is it bringing to the table?
Well, John, it's actually my real #1 favorite item or feature on the camera. And I know I said it was electronic variable ND, but truly it is clear image zoom. It's an amazing technology that Sony has implemented in our cameras for many, many years. And essentially it allows you to zoom in on any lens, prime, manual zoom, or servo zoom, regardless of the zoom position you're in. So on a servo zoom lens, what will happen is I'll zoom in all the way to the end of that servo zoom's capability. Clear image zoom just takes over and continues up to 2 times in HD, 1.5 times in 4K. Now let's take a look at a manual zoom. Anywhere within the zoom range that I've gotten to manually, from that position, I can zoom in again 2 times in HD or 1.5 in 4K. So what does that look like? Well, let's say I've got a 28 to 70 f2 like I do right here, and I have it in the 50 millimeter position, and I have my aperture set to f2. Well, I can now servo zoom, so I get that smooth zoom, not touching the lens otherwise, just the servo, 50 to 100 millimeters in HD or 50 to 75 in 4K, and I maintain that f2. Take it a step further. On a prime lens, could be a 50, an 85, does not matter. Throw the prime lens on, turn on clear image zoom. The visually lossless technology turns that 85 into a 85 to 170, turns the 50 into a 50 to 100. Let's say that 50 is a 1.2, like we have. You've just gotten yourself a 50 to 100 1.2 lens. It's incredible.
So we've already discussed other FX series cameras, the FX3 and the 30. Where does this one differ in the audio department? Is it similar? Is it really different?
Well, the FX6 has a very powerful way to acquire audio. I should note, first of all, although the handle is removable on the FX6, all the audio runs through the handle. So if you were to run it on a gimbal, remove the handle, you're going to have to record audio separately. That being said, we've got 2 XLRs on the handle. We have our famous hot shoe to bring in wireless audio. And then we also have a 2-channel built-in stereo mic. Now, how do we set all that up? Well, because the body itself is very small, it's only 2 pounds, not a lot of real estate, we do everything through the menu. Other than channel 1 and 2 levels, and whether it's auto or manual, everything else is in the menu. So let's take a look. So we hop into the menu and we go to the audio menu itself. And what you're going to see here right at the top is you have your selection for channel 1. That's the easy one. So channel 1, we have input 1, we have internal mic, and we have the shoe channel 1. Pretty straightforward. Where a lot of folks trip up is when they set up channel 2. Again, because you could be using a shotgun that's a mono mic or a stereo mic, so you want to make sure you have those settings proper. We go to channel 2 input, and now we see actual 4 choices, not just 3. So we could select input 1, input 2, internal mic, or the shoe channel 2. And it's where you select 1 and 2 where a lot of folks get confused. So if we're using a stereo mic, like our MS2, you have your left channel goes into channel 1, and you have channel 1 set for input 1. You're simply going to select input 2 for your channel 2 input. Pretty straightforward, right?
Right.
But sometimes you might have a mono mic, but you want to have a backup onto your second channel. So we put our mono mic into input 1. We select input 1 for channel 1, and then channel 2, we simply move the cursor up to input 1. Now, literally, both channel 1 and channel 2 are getting their audio source from input 1. Of course, you do have those other choices like the built-in stereo mic or the MI shoe, so you can use any combination of those. All your other settings and levels in particular for channels 3 and 4 are all done through the menu system. It's pretty simple.
That's really a lot simpler than I thought it would be when you see these big box cameras. They look intimidating, so to know it's pretty easy to set up your auto is kind of nice.
It is, for sure.
So I guess we have to say goodbye to our FX6 here. It's really shown that it's a really good option for individuals who just need a quick cinema camera setup, or for production studios who are doing a lot of projects at one time to be able to quickly change those settings and users. It's just a really good all-arounder.
It's one of my favorite cameras that Sony's ever made. We make a lot of great cameras, but the success of the FX6 speaks for itself.
Yeah, it's a very popular camera for sure. And if you're interested in FX6, let us know here at Focus Camera. We'll definitely help you out with it. And of course, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.